A desperate Apache woman begs a lone cowboy, "Save my tribe, and I'll give you strong offspring." Will Jack risk everything to fight for a future he never imagined? Watch this incredible story of courage and survival unfold. Don't miss out. Subscribe now and hit the bell to follow every thrilling part of this epic tale. Let's get started. The fading sun painted the Arizona plains in shades of crimson and gold, casting long shadows across the rugged land. Jack Turner's horse trotted slowly into the canyon, the rhythmic sound of hooves blending with the whisper of the evening wind. He had been riding since dawn, searching for a creek he'd heard about from another drifter. Water was scarce in this part of the territory, and Jack had no intention of pushing his luck with an empty canteen. But as he approached the narrow bend, he caught sight of a figure in the fading light, someone who didn't belong there. It was a young Apache woman, her stance rigid yet trembling, as if she had been standing for hours, waiting. Dust clung to her skin, streaking her face in uneven patterns, and her dark hair was tangled by the wind. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes, sharp, black and unyielding, locked on him the moment he appeared. Jack pulled the reins, slowing his horse, unsure if this was a trap or a plea. In this land, it could be either. She didn't move until he stopped within a few paces, her gaze never breaking. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse, but carried an urgency that pierced the quiet air. "Save my tribe, and I'll give you strong offspring," she whispered. The words hung between them, strange, yet striking in their honesty. Jack's brow furrowed, his hand tightening on the saddle horn. He had heard of desperate bargains, but never one so blunt, so tied to survival and legacy. His instincts told him to turn away. Apache affairs had cost many cowboys their lives, but something in her tone kept him still. It wasn't seduction, it was desperation wrapped in dignity. Jack swung one leg over the saddle and stepped down, his boots crunching against the dry earth. "What trouble are you in?" he asked, his voice low but steady. She glanced over her shoulder toward the distant horizon, where thin plumes of smoke spiraled upward, barely visible in the dying light. The air carried faint echoes, gunfire, shouts, the chaotic symphony of battle. Her people were under attack, and every moment she stood here was a moment stolen from their fight for survival. Jack's gut tightened. This wasn't just a village skirmish, it was a raid meant to destroy. The woman's breathing grew heavier as she explained. Bandits from the north had descended on her people, armed with rifles and burning everything they touched. Her father, the village chief, had sent her ahead to find help, but the nearest Apache allies were days away. She had crossed open land alone, risking capture, to find someone, anyone, willing to ride into danger. Jack listened, his jaw clenched, his mind running through the dangers of stepping into this fight. If the bandits didn't kill him, the U.S. cavalry might arrest him for siding with the Apache. Yet her words carried a truth that silenced his doubts. He took a step closer, the weight of his revolver a reminder of what he could do and what it might cost. "You don't even know me," Jack said quietly. Her lips curled into something between a smile and a grimace. "I don't need to know you," she replied. "I only need to know if you have the courage to fight." There was no flattery in her tone, only the measured challenge of someone who had no more time to beg. Jack had spent years wandering these lands, never staying in one place long enough to care. Now here she was, offering him a purpose as fierce as the desert sun. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of burning wood and something darker, charred flesh. Jack felt it in his chest, the same way he had felt the first time he saw a town reduced to ash by raiders. He looked past her to the horizon, where the smoke twisted into the sky like black snakes. His mind flickered with memories of his own kin, lost in violence. This wasn't his fight, but somewhere deep inside, he knew it could have been. He reached up, adjusting his hat, and studied the woman again. She wasn't just asking for help, she was demanding survival. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the restless snort of his horse. The woman shifted her stance, as if preparing to run back the way she had come, ready to face the danger alone if she had to. Jack couldn't let that happen. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then answered, "Naeli." It rolled off her tongue like a promise. Jack nodded slowly, as though sealing an unspoken agreement. The canyon around them seemed to narrow, the world shrinking down to the choice he was about to make. Jack knew what crossing this line meant. Once he rode with her, there'd be no turning back. He'd be marked as a man who fought for the Apache, and that would follow him wherever he went. But the thought of doing nothing, of letting her ride into danger alone, felt heavier than any consequence. Without another word, he stepped forward, took the reins, and guided his horse toward her. "Let's ride," he said, his voice firm. In her eyes, something shifted. Not relief, but a fierce spark of hope. And in that moment, the fading day gave way to a night full of peril. Jack didn't hesitate. With a swift movement, he helped Naeli onto his horse behind him. The weight of her presence was sudden but not unwelcome. The horse's muscles tensed beneath them as Jack urged it forward, galloping toward the distant plume of smoke rising against the fading sky. The wind whipped past his face, stinging his eyes and drying the sweat on his brow, but Jack kept his focus sharp. Every second mattered. Naeli gripped him tightly, her voice urgent and steady as she pointed ahead. "They're coming from the north." His heart quickened, not from fear, but the rising adrenaline of the chase. The narrow path was treacherous, winding along the rocky outcrops that overlooked the valley. Jack navigated it carefully, knowing a single misstep could send them tumbling down the steep slopes. Naeli scanned the horizon, her eyes sharp as a hawk's, guiding him through the terrain she knew all too well. The sounds of chaos grew louder with every beat of their horses' hooves, the crackling of burning timber, desperate shouts, the clatter of weapons. The bandits were ruthless, and Jack could feel the weight of lives hanging in the balance. This wasn't just a raid. It was an assault meant to wipe her people from the land. As they approached the ridge, the full horror of the scene unfolded before them. Smoke billowed in thick grey clouds, twisting upward like angry spirits. Below, the village was in flames. Small huts built from adobe and timber burned with a ferocity that cast flickering shadows over the fleeing families. Men stood their ground with bows and spears, faces set with grim determination, but the bandits' guns were devastating. Naeli's voice cut through the noise as she shouted orders to her kin, rallying them with a fierce cry that carried the weight of generations. Her courage was a spark in the darkness. Jack felt the cold leather of his revolver beneath his coat and drew it, the weight a grim reminder of the violence to come. He urged his horse down the slope toward the thick of the fighting. The pounding of hooves mixed with the thunder of gunfire, creating a deadly symphony that echoed off the canyon walls. Jack's aim was steady, despite the chaos around him. He fired quickly, each shot finding its mark with deadly precision. Bandits fell or ducked for cover, surprised by the sudden assault from an unexpected enemy. The Apache warriors caught the spark of his intervention and pushed forward with renewed energy. Naeli leapt from the horse and ran into the heart of the battle, her voice rising in a fierce battle cry. Her people answered her call, their spirits bolstered by the sudden hope of reinforcements. Jack watched her lead with the fire of a true warrior, her arrows flying swift and true, cutting down enemies with practiced skill. The clash of steel and the echo of gunshots filled the air as the battle raged into the twilight. Jack's muscles ached, but he refused to yield. Every swing of his revolver was a promise to Naeli and her tribe, a promise that he would not abandon them. Time seemed to blur as the fight dragged on. The bandits, though armed and numerous, were disorganized without leadership. Jack and Naeli's combined efforts began turning the tide. Villagers who had fled returned to join the fray, emboldened by the arrival of the cowboy. The Apache warriors, fiercely loyal to their home and kin, fought with unmatched tenacity. Jack's respect for Nayeli and her people deepened with every passing moment. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a fight to protect a legacy, a way of life that had endured centuries. The setting sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the battlefield. Exhaustion threatened to overtake Jack, but he pushed through, fueled by the determination in Nayeli's eyes. The bandits began to falter, their fire losing precision as fear crept into their ranks. Jack took careful aim, picking off those who tried to retreat or regroup. Nayeli moved beside him, swift and silent, like a shadow in the darkening landscape. Their fight was no longer just about saving a village. It was about saving a family, a tribe bound by history and blood. Smoke and dust hung thick in the air, and the smell of burning wood mixed with sweat and dirt. The once chaotic battlefield now showed signs of control. The bandits, realizing their losses, began to retreat under the cover of nightfall. Nayeli's voice rang out again, commanding her people to hold the line and not give chase recklessly. Jack reloaded his revolver with shaking hands, his breath ragged but steady. He felt the weight of the moment. This victory was fragile and could vanish with the coming dawn. Yet for now, the Apache tribe stood stronger because of their combined fight. As the dust settled, Jack lowered his weapon and looked around at the faces of the survivors. Some were bruised and battered, others wept quietly for those lost, but all held a fierce pride. Nayeli approached him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, respect born from shared struggle. She clasped his hand firmly and said, "You've already chosen your side, Cowboy. There's no turning back now." Jack nodded slowly, knowing she spoke the truth. The ride into danger had forged a bond neither could ignore. Together, they had faced fire and blood and survived. Night had fully fallen over the canyon, and the once roaring battle had quieted to an uneasy silence. The bandits, broken and defeated, had fled into the darkness, leaving behind smoldering ruins and the weary survivors of the Apache village. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, mingled with the sharper tang of blood and sweat. Jack's muscles ached, and the dirt on his clothes felt like a second skin. But despite the exhaustion that threatened to pull him under, he stood tall, his eyes scanning the remnants of the fight. The village had survived, and with it, a fragile hope. Nayeli moved toward him, her face lit by the flickering glow of dying embers. Her eyes, still bright with the fire of battle, softened as they met Jack's. "You didn't just save my people," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "You've given us a future." The weight of her words settled over Jack like the desert night itself, vast, silent, and filled with meaning. He looked at her then, truly looked, and saw not just a desperate woman, but a leader, a protector of her people and their legacy. Around them, the tribe was beginning to gather, the elders stepping forward from the shadows to offer thanks and blessings. Their voices were calm, but filled with reverence for the man who had risked everything to stand with them. Jack felt a strange mix of pride and humility wash over him. He had come here looking for water, for nothing more than survival, and instead had found a purpose deeper than he ever imagined. The promise Nayeli made was not just words, it was a sacred bond, a pact sealed by fire and blood. The elders spoke in quiet tones, their words heavy with tradition and history. Jack didn't understand every phrase, but he felt the gravity behind them. In Apache culture, promises were sacred, binding one's honor across lifetimes. Nayeli's promise to give him strong offspring was not merely about family. It was about the continuation of a people, a legacy forged in hardship and hope. Jack knew he had stepped into something larger than himself, a connection that would tie him to this land and these people for years to come. As the firelight flickered and shadows danced on the cracked adobe walls, Jack felt a shift inside him. This wasn't the end of his journey, it was just the beginning. The world he had known, full of lonely trails and aimless rides, was giving way to a new chapter. Here, in the quiet aftermath of battle, between the gunfire and the night, two worlds had collided, one of rugged individualism and one of ancient community, and neither would be the same again. The village was still scarred, but the spirit of its people burned brighter than any flame. Jack walked slowly through the camp, his eyes meeting those of the warriors, the women, the children who had survived the raid. Each gaze told a story of loss, courage, and resilience. He felt the invisible threads that bound them all, the unspoken understanding that survival meant fighting together, beyond race or history. Nayeli's tribe had welcomed him not as an outsider, but as one of their own. The night grew deeper, the stars blanketing the sky with their cold light. Jack found himself seated near the embers of the fire, Nayeli settling beside him with a quiet strength. They shared few words, but the silence was comfortable, filled with mutual respect. In the stillness, Jack felt a sense of belonging he hadn't known in years. It was a bond forged not only in the heat of battle, but in the quiet moments afterward, moments where promises are made and futures are dreamed. Nayeli told him stories of her people, of the land that had nurtured them for centuries. She spoke of seasons and cycles, of rites and rituals passed down through generations. Jack listened, fascinated by the depth of history carried in her voice. In her stories, he heard echoes of his own past, the struggles, the loss, the need to protect something greater than oneself. It was a connection across cultures, a shared understanding born from hardship and hope. As dawn approached, the first light crept over the horizon, washing the village in soft gold. The survivors began the slow work of rebuilding, clearing rubble, tending to wounds, comforting the young. Jack helped where he could, his hands steady despite the fatigue. He saw in their faces not just pain, but determination, the fierce will to endure and thrive. Nayeli stood among them, a beacon of strength and hope, her earlier plea now transformed into a promise fulfilled. Before leaving, Jack knelt beside Nayeli, taking her hands in his. The promise they had made was no longer just words whispered in desperation. It was a pact that would shape their lives. In her eyes, he saw the future of a tribe reborn, and in his heart, the courage to face whatever came next. The bond forged in fire was more than survival. It was the beginning of a legacy that neither time nor hardship could break. Jack's ride into the canyon had started as a search for water, but it ended as a journey into the heart of a people fighting to survive. The echoes of gunfire had faded, replaced by the quiet rhythms of a village determined to live. As he mounted his horse to ride with Nayeli toward that uncertain future, Jack knew one thing for certain. Their story was far from over. Together, they would face the dawn, united by a bond that no force could sever.